Welcome to Lit It Up with Rajeshwari Kalyanam. Today is the World Book Day. A happy book day for you all listeners. In fact, I think most of us are busy listening to a lot of live conversations of authors that many publishers are bringing to us during the lockdown. It's keeping us busy, so I've been going a little low profile on the podcast. But I think the World Book Day deserves one podcast which is surely dedicated to books and reading. And I thought I will kind of make it a little different. I just went to my almirah and looked at the back of the shelf to the books that I have not seen them in a while. That are books that I have read quite a long time ago and which I have liked. And I picked up 5 books. There are many, but of course we cannot just go on and on. Books is an unending topic for all of us. I'll start with the book called Roots. I'm sure this has been on the reading list. I mean, this has been read by almost all of you. Alex Haley's the author Alex Haley's search for his roots, family origins, that has kind of transformed into a book which is considered to be one of the most important books in American history. When I first read this book, I was quite young, yes, and I have been quite affected by the entire saga of the slave trade. And the one thing that, as they say, books actually, when you read them, they create an imagination. And there are the two scenes that have been struck in my mind. I mean, these scenes I have imagined while reading the book. One is when Alex Haley, of course, this is the story of Kunta Kinte. He's an African, and he's captured in the 18th century as an adolescent, and he's sold into the slavery in Africa, and then transported. He's then sent to North America, where he becomes a slave, of course, and in fact he's working there. And then the story goes on to talk about the freedom of the slaves and the Civil War, the freedom of the slaves, and then it goes on tracking the roots of Alex Haley until his time. So I remember these 2 scenes which I have visualized quite vividly, and that's the impact of the book. I mean, some people call this book in fact, the book was apparently first put in the non-fiction fiction category, and then later they had shifted it to a non-fiction category. Though a lot of people kind of have criticized the research that Alex Haley had done, I think one of the things that strikes in the book is, of course, a trace of history and a time of history which talks about this. A very important time of history which talks about this, one of the worst one of the worst aspects of human history, actually, the slavery. And of course it also this protagonist who is an ancestor of Alex, Kunta Kinte, there is a scene which describes how he was picked up from his place in Namibia, I suppose. And then that is a scene so beautifully described. I can still remember how I had imagined him, how he was kind of trying not to be caught, but he's caught and then sold off into the slavery trade. And then there's another scene which describes how these slaves are transported from Africa to North America. Such a heartrending description of the entire scene. Actually, I can never forget that. I will read one small portion just for people to remember. Here it goes. White folks ain't got no secrets, the fiddler said to Kunta. They swarm themselves with niggers. Ain't much they do, hardly know where they go. It ain't niggers listening. If they're eating and talking, nigger girl serving and acting dumber, and she is remembering every word she hears. Even when white folks get so scared, they start spelling out words. If any niggers around, well, plenty house niggers ain't long repeating it letter for letter to the nearest nigger. What can spell and piece together and what was said? I mean, them niggers don't sleep. They knows what them white folks are talking about. I hope I kind of clear in what they're speaking, it's of course they're talking about how whatever white people speak, there are black people around who pick it up, and the servant girl probably serving the food, or so many people around in the house. Even if sometimes these white men would be so worried about letting out their secrets that they start speaking in alphabets, and they start spelling out the words so that these people don't get it. But then there are so many people around that they remember each letter, come back and put it together, and then get the whole gist of what's happening. So what was happening up north continued to arrive piece by piece through the summer into the fall. Then as time passed, Luther began to report that as exercised as white folks were about the taxes, that wasn't their only worry. They're saying some counties got twice many niggers as white folks. There's worrying that King Cross the Water might start offering us niggers freedom to fight against these white folks. Luther waited for the gasps of the audience to subside. Fact, he said, done heard some white folks so scared done took to locking their doors at night. Don't even quit talking round their house niggers. Kuntal lay on his mattress at night for weeks afterwards thinking about freedom. As far as he could tell, it meant having no massa at all, doing as one wanted, going wherever one pleased. But it was ridiculous, he decided finally, to think that white folks would bring blacks all the way across the big water to work as slaves and then set them free. It would never happen. Well, of course, the story is just halfway or not even halfway through when this happens, and there's so much more that happens in the book. The book has been made into mini series, and there's a lot of information on the book everywhere. But I think if there is time, I would like to go back to reading this book. It's been so long. I'm sure there are a lot of books that you guys want to go back to reading. It'll be nice if you can mention them when you hear this podcast and get back to me. It'll give me so much energy in doing more podcasts, and of course also some information about any books that I might not have read and would love to check them out. There's yet another book I want to talk about. This is Anne Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl. Who has not read it? I'm sure all of you have read it. And I think today, as the whole world goes into lockdown, confined to our own spaces, of course, there's so much comfort here in the house. I mean, we and most of us who are not affected by COVID-19 are still safe and with family. But yet we have this whole feeling of being confined is actually working on our nerves. This Diary of a Girl, Anne Frank, which she had written during the Second World War, when the family goes into hiding in Amsterdam in one of the warehouses. She is a teenager and she starts writing this diary. Probably the diary is written for 2 years, after which the family is caught, and eventually there's a whole group of people in the hiding, and the entire group is caught, and everyone except Anne's father gets killed or dies. In fact, Anne Frank also dies of disease in one of the confinement, the concentration camps. This was during the Nazi oppression, and in one of the this book has many great moments in it. It's, for one, it is a very it's a teenage girl with no apprehensions, and she's out there all out writing about her confinement. There are moments of joy, the moment of celebration. They celebrate Hanukkah there within the hiding, and these 2 years are also a time when she discovers her feelings, and she wanted the diary to be published, and she goes on to correct her writings in between, and there are 2 versions of the book which she keeps them, and thankfully they were not destroyed. And finally the father, who goes back to collect these diaries and edits them with the help of one more person, and the book is then printed for general consumption, The Diary of a Young Girl. So this is one of the portions I thought would be more apt for today's time. So I'm reading this from Anne Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl. At one time, I was very obsessed with the Nazi history, and I would read all books and I would watch all films. But I found this to be one of the very honest and very intense book during of the time. Dearest Kitty, we don't really know how to react. Up till now, Anne Frank is talking to her diary. Up till now, very little news about the Jews had reached us, and we thought it best to stay as cheerful as possible. Every now and then, Miep used to mention what had happened to a friend, and Mother or Mrs. Van Daan would start to cry, so she decided it was better not to say any more. But we bombarded Mr. Dussel with questions, and the stories he had to tell were so gruesome and dreadful that we can't get them out of our heads. Once we have had time to digest the news, we'll probably go back to our usual joking and teasing. It won't do us or those outside any good if we continue to be as gloomy as we are now. And what would be the point of turning the secret annex into a melancholy annex? She was very funny, by the way. Anne was very funny, and it just smiled at so many parts, and it's equally empathizing, it's equally heartrending, and it's equally funny. It's an amazing book. Well, I continue the extract. She says, and what would be the point of turning the secret annex into melancholy annex? No matter what I am doing, I can't help thinking about those who are gone. I catch myself laughing and remember that it's a disgrace to be so cheerful. But am I supposed to spend the whole day crying? No, I can't do that. This gloom will pass. Added to this misery, there's another, but of a more personal nature, and it pales in comparison to the suffering I have just told you about. Still, I can't help telling you that lately I've begun to feel deserted. I'm surrounded by too great a void. I never used to give it much thought, since my mind was filled with my friends and having a good time. Now I think either about unhappy things or about myself. It's taken a while, but I finally realized that Father, no matter how kind he may be, can't take the place of my former world. When it comes to my feelings, Mother and Margot ceased to count long ago. But why do I bother you with this foolishness? I am terribly ungrateful, Kitty. I know, but when I've been scolded for the upteenth time and have all these other woes to think about as well, my head begins to reel. Yours, Anne. Well, I think that should give us an idea about what our children must be going through, sitting at home, listening to us all the time, missing their friends. So excuse me for a few mispronunciations in the roots. I think that's the native language is what I couldn't get it to so well, but I'm sure all of you have read the book, and you will go back to it and read it again in your own way. Thank you so much. Stay home, stay safe.